Hi, everyone, and thank you for joining us today for our webinar, Top Strategies to Build Safer Job Sites with the Construction Safety Playbook. My name is Jamila Hassan, and I'm a Field Marketing Manager here at HammerTech. I'll be your host for today. Before we get into it, I'd like to cover a few quick housekeeping items. First, this session is being recorded for on-demand purposes. Second, we'd like to keep this session as interactive as possible, so I encourage you to ask questions and leave comments via the chat. Lastly, we will be sending out a post-event survey shortly after the webinar ends, so please share your feedback with us and let us know how we did. And now I'd like to introduce you to our speakers, Jake Nelson and Georgia Burgers. Jake Nelson is an environmental health and safety professional at HammerTech. He specializes in construction safety and compliance. He's collaborated with contractors to enhance safety practices and streamline compliance through technology. His expertise includes risk assessment, regulatory compliance, and developing innovative safety programs for the construction industry. Georgia Burgers is the Vice President of Marketing at HammerTech. Previously, she was a Senior Project Manager at Mace, overseeing large-scale construction projects. With extensive experience in construction operations and technology, she plays a key role in driving industry innovation. And now I'll hand it off to Georgia.
Thank you so much, Jamila. It's lovely to be here this morning, and I'm looking forward to this session with everyone today. So I'm going to take you very quickly through an agenda, and then I'll give you a quick introduction into HammerTech for those who may not know who we are as an organization. So, but I'll take us through the agenda to start with. So I think the premise for today is really around providing contractors, no matter your size, scale, whether you're specialty, general, or an EPC, it's providing you with the ability to be able to benchmark your safety program against sort of standards across the industry. So HammerTech works across 550 contractors, and as Jamila introduced Jake, we've got in-house safety professionals who've worked across major contractor safety programs. And so what we've been able to develop here is a playbook to give people the ability to look at safety processes at large that make up a best-in-class safety program and be able to assess sort of where they're at against those and find opportunities to grow and improve their program. So we'll be taking you through the contents of the safety playbook. And then following that, we'll be taking you through two really great tools for being able to distribute responsibility for a safety program. So Jake will dive into this in a lot more detail shortly, but really giving you all a tool to make safety a team sport through the accountability matrix. And then a second tool, which is called the consistency survey. And that gives people the ability to be able to measure how you're actually doing and engage teams in actually implementing that safety program. And then last but not least is how to take all of this great information that we'll take you through today and bring it into your company. So again, as I mentioned, assessing where you're at and finding the best place to start. So it's going to be jam-packed. There's a lot to cover. As Jamila mentioned, we'd love to take your questions throughout, and we will have some time at the end. So let's make sure there's some time for us to be able to make sure that you get all your questions answered. Jamila is also going to be putting in some of the resources as we progress throughout the conversation. So keep an eye out for those. You'll be able to download a copy of the safety playbook to be able to actually look through with us and take it through. And so with that, I'll just give you a quick overview of HammerTech for those who don't know who we are as an organization and why it is you should be listening to us and taking in this session with us today. So we're a safety platform specifically built for construction, serving general contractors, specialty contractors, and EPC contractors right across the world. And so what we found in the industry is that many contractors are using multiple systems that are disconnected for managing safety processes. So what we find is that sometimes there's a couple of processes in a finance tool, perhaps insurance certificates, things like that. Perhaps then you've got some inspections and observations sitting across in a project management tool. Maybe you've got an app managing orientations, as well as a combination of processes that sit sort of within binders and Excel spreadsheets from a reporting standpoint. And what the challenge with that really is it makes it very difficult to be able to get a holistic view of how you're doing across safety. It makes it very, very difficult to manage all those processes, and makes it difficult for subcontractors as well as site teams to kind of know where to go to actually be able to engage in your safety program. And so Hamatech, on average, for $1 billion contractor, you can do some maths on this yourself. So if you're, $500 million, if you're 500 million in revenue, you can halve this number. But what we found is that for $1 billion contractor, there's about 130,000 safety transactions that happen each year. So that's a transaction could be processing an orientation, it could be raising an inspection, it could be raising an observation. So it's a huge, huge volume of safety processes that are managed by any one contractor. So no matter your size, it's still tens of thousands of processes. And so what's really important is that we try and find ways to simplify managing these processes so that safety teams and project teams can spend more time out in the field, meaningfully engaging in risk reduction practices like pre-planning, execution monitoring, things like that, rather than managing paperwork. And so what Hamatech does is it brings everything under one roof. So you have one system to be able to manage everything from a safety standpoint. And then further to that, what we do is we provide you with the ability to connect your processes together. So for example, a worker does an orientation within Hamatech, they provide their certificates, and then that profile, that worker profile, connects to a JHA where the worker can sign on, and you have record that exactly that worker signed on to that JHA to be able to view that in reporting later on and make sure that every worker on your job site actually has signed on to the package of works. Similarly, the certificates from the worker profile connect to equipment. So for example, if you need to do a pre-start inspection for a piece of equipment, only verified workers that have the right certificates for that piece of equipment are going to be actually able to undertake that pre-start inspection. So it's really facilitating checks and balances for you. And what that also does is provides a really fantastic, rich data view across your safety program afterwards. So I'll leave it there, but it gives you a little bit of a view of sort of who we are and how we're really trying to help out with the construction industry. We're working with lots of fantastic folks across the industry, from sort of 50 million size contractors all the way up to sort of the 10 billion plus, and have products that suit all scales. So looking forward to taking you through today, and we'll dive into the detail a little bit more. So Mila, if you wouldn't mind moving to the next slide, and we'll get started. So what is the Construction Safety Playbook? So I have a question for you all. Please feel free to put your responses into the chat. But within your organization, how are safety responsibilities determined, and how are they assigned prior to starting a project? Would love to understand how you're managing that today. And so we'll also drop a link into the chat as well so that you can download the playbook and take a look as we're actually working through what this is. So as I mentioned, it's a high-level safety program that allows safety leaders and project teams to have a tool to be able to establish and implement consistent processes from pre-planning right the way through to project closeout. So whether you have a well-established program and you're just looking to see sort of maybe how others do it, or you're starting from scratch or you're adding on, this playbook can really help you benchmark and level up. So Jake, with that, I'd love to hand over to you to provide us with some practical examples of putting this playbook into practice, and I guess when you wished you would have had something like this as a safety manager in your prior life.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Georgia. Well, yeah, I'll give you a specific example. So as a GC, we had a big CSIP job, 500 or 600 people on site, and the major MEP trades, typically average between 80 and 120 a piece. So since there was no contractual requirement of our subcontractors to have a safety rep on site, our site safety manager had taken on the role for every trade. So training, pre-planning, inspections, closing out issues, claims management, everything. We had the contractual verbiage to put subcontractors on notice, but it really wasn't being leveraged. So the site team and subcontractors were so pressured by the production, the typical production schedule pressures that it took a few major incidents occurring before anybody took notice. And unfortunately, that happens a lot in our world. We had our team was fully capable, but we didn't have the bandwidth really to really execute those safety functions. So they say if you're reactive and you end up focusing on repairing, and that's exactly what we did. So having a structured plan and a playbook like this and buy-in from the team, being able to hold everybody accountable, leverage contracts, would have prevented a lot of the failures that we had. So when we lost that hack of plywood from the sloped roof, maybe the team would have had the bandwidth to focus on, engineering methods to store that material. Or when we had engineered drawings for our excavation, altering the excavation, and it had been deviated from, maybe our project team would have noticed that in real time. Instead, it slipped through the cracks. So, our project team was busy fighting fires that needed immediate attention, like guardrails being down on that, elevated slab. Not having the structure or the accountability on that job led to those incidents, and it will lead to incidents and injuries. Your schedule takes a hit, morale goes south, and it just compounds, one thing after the next. So this playbook really, it's a tool that can be used to help you formalize, communicate your plan, create some consistency around expectations across your organization, and give you a real tangible way for your project teams to hold each other accountable.
Awesome. And you've probably all seen now there'll be a link in the chat. Jamila just said she'll type it out so that you can all download it. We will be sharing it as a part of the post-event email as well. But what you'll find in there is a really fantastic and detailed layout of all the processes that are recommended really as a foundational part of a safety program, which we'll go into in a little moment. The accountability matrix is in there as well, and then some recommendations around actually rolling out the program to help you formulate how this playbook can really work for your organization. So I think with that, let's dive into some of the processes that are outlined in the program. And what I'm going to ask everyone to do is to take a look. So what you'll see on the screen here is there's 3 groups that we've put these processes in. We haven't listed out every single process on here, but it's just to give you a sense of all of the sense of how we're grouping these processes. So we've got pre-planning, execution, records, and incidents. And the question that I have for you all is, if you could dedicate more time and resources to one of these process groups, maybe to improve some outcomes on your job sites or improve engagement with, say, subcontractors, which would it be? Where are you sort of looking to focus at the moment? I'd love to hear. And so Jake, could you take us through sort of the process groupings and what the thinking is behind this?
Yeah. So, I mean, some, to add to the examples we've got up here, pre-construction, maybe, your scope review, doing a JHA based off of that, your emergency response planning, geotech surveys, public protection, things like that. Your execution would be all of your day-to-day operational safety. So you're, coordinating efforts with personnel and equipment, permitting high-risk activities in real time, doing the regular inspections and evaluations. And then lastly, you've got your lagging indicators. So your incidents and injuries, your post-project review, and creating lessons learned around those things, which can be really valuable when you're bringing that information full circle and back into project setup for the next project.
And then, so one of the challenges that we were talking about the other day was sort of, I think there's been an increased emphasis on pre-planning recently, which is really fantastic, because the earlier that we can plan for safer work practices, the better. What have you found to be some of the challenges with actually taking that pre-planning and moving it into action? And how would you recommend teams make changes to be able to account for some of those challenges?
Yeah. I'd say there's a gap between pre-planning and execution. And for us, we tended to miss that mark, bridging that gap. For me, in the incident investigations that I've done, it was more common that we had a great plan and missed our mark than it was to not have a plan at all. So the work was being planned, and we were great at planning the work, but we're not great at really bringing all of those efforts into execution and then measuring how well that plan's working for us.
Yeah, super interesting. And I think we'll dive into a little bit more around kind of how to actually take that through. But one of the tools that's mentioned, or one of the processes that's mentioned in the construction safety playbook is pre-task plans. And so what you'll see is a really good explanation of those. Pre-task plans aren't done consistently across the industry, but what we found is they do represent a really good opportunity to actually be able to refer back to that JHA and take kind of micro steps and micro learnings into the day-to-day on the job site, to be able to get the teams really using some of these kind of bigger plans and make it really applicable and ready for the day. And what we've heard is that has been a really useful tool from an execution standpoint, and really fantastic way to engage subcontractors and workers, who often, the subcontractors are often the ones leading those pre-task plans, and the workers really engaging with them, to be able to kind of turn these processes, this planning, into something really measurable and actionable for the day. One of the things I also wanted to call out is that we've made a lot of the processes that are mentioned in the construction safety playbook available to download. So again, we'll be including those as a part of the post-event send out, and you'll be able to download these processes. They are in a PDF form. The reason that we did that is, not working. We didn't want to preclude anyone who wasn't using Hammertech or wasn't using a digital form to be able to look at how some of these processes are done and be able to uplift your safety program. So they're in a really easy downloadable PDF form. Feel free to check them out. I think there's a pre-task plan included in there. I think it's like a high risk, one of the high risk permits, perhaps a hot works permit that's in there, and a couple of others. So feel free to take a look at those. The other thing that we've recently launched is a knowledge center, and our very own Jake, who's on the call here, has put together some really useful short videos that actually explain some of these processes. So really great resource to be able to share out with your teams. If you are rolling out a new process, feel free to take a look at, it's called the Knowledge Center, and you'll be able to take a look at those videos and perhaps helps distribute some of that sort of communication in advance around what these new processes are that you might be taking your teams through or looking to improve consistency around. So the next part of the safety playbook is the accountability matrix. So we're working on the assumption that all of you have probably seen the accountability matrix at some point in your time. Perhaps not quite like this though, and that's sort of the difference that we wanted to take you through today. So one of the questions that I have for this one is, how well are roles and responsibilities or expectations distributed among your project teams? Jake, you mentioned this the other day, that safety can sometimes be seen as safety's responsibility, but really making safety a team sport is really how we get more hands on deck to be able to distribute and drive engagement and make sure that every single worker understands that they have the ability to influence safety day to day on a project. So could you take us through, Jake, sort of the difference in this accountability matrix, and how you'd recommend deploying this across an organization?
Yeah, absolutely. So the template that we have here, it's a good starting point for defining roles and responsibilities, not only for you and within your organization, but for your subcontractors as well. And that's throughout the project lifecycle. From pre-con to site mobilization through operations and closeout. So a lot of companies and probably most companies have something similar to this, and it includes general expectations and KPIs for, positions like superintendents and project managers. But the safety responsibilities are usually minimal, like number of inspections per week or general training requirements. And then maybe it's being evaluated, once a year during a performance review. It's not doing a whole lot to really move the needle in terms of company safety culture. So an accountability matrix with depth like this is really going to enable you to define and measure from a much broader level certain trends that aren't being recognized otherwise.
Fantastic. And then, so I just have another quick question for you around this accountability matrix, Jake. So we've got different frequencies across here, and I guess how does that differ from sort of other accountability matrix that you've seen across there in the industry? And what about this frequency is it makes it sort of something that's really important for people to consider?
Yeah, typically the accountability matrices that we see, like, they don't have a timeline associated with them. So while you have these general requirements maybe around your role, again, that aren't typically being looked at on a regular basis, there's not a lot of information to go off of there. So having it really clearly defined and having, actionable, measurable responsibilities there. When you're looking at that and you're revisiting it periodically, you can actually see where there's a change or where there's a gap or you're much better able to track your performance, and your general overall safety culture.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you. And so communication is really important for this. Some people may not be actually working with an existing accountability matrix, let alone one that has a little more detail in this. How would you recommend developing a communication plan to be able to roll it out effectively?
I say, oh, give me one second. I mean, I think it needs to be a decision made by the team that you're working with. So whether you're doing this from, an organizational level or you're doing it from an individual project level, it needs to be a group effort and agreed upon by that team. That way everybody has a little bit of skin in the game and you've got everyone's buy-in from that point.
Yeah, awesome. So it's sort of something to bring in at least the beginning of the project or as a group effort there. Yeah, like you said, if it's coming just from safety or it's not really getting that buy-in from all the people that are wanting to be, we need to be involved in this, then it can be really difficult to get the uptake on it from the outset. So yeah, I like that. I think that's fantastic. So the next part that we're going to move into here is how can you actually take this playbook and look to move it across into your team. So whether it's your team as a project team or into your organization across the board. And so Jake, I'm going to throw it over to you here. Why is it important to customize this playbook rather than just taking it sort of exactly as we put it out there?
Yeah. So, construction's really nuanced and expectations vary and can vary drastically. Like the responsibilities of a safety manager on a data center look a lot different than one who's managing 8, 10, 12 active projects. So when expectations aren't communicated or they're unclear is when things start to fail.
Yeah, interesting. And so let's dive into the how. So Jake, take us through sort of where to start with looking at customizing this for a program or for a project.
Yeah, I would start by leveraging that accountability matrix there. First, if it were me, I'd make a list of the current processes that you're doing, who's doing them. It's almost impossible to really sustain a great program if everything is on safety, like the example you provided, especially at scale. So listing all of that out and figuring out who's doing what, I think is a good first step. Second, with the one that we've included, it has what we found to be common in our industry. So you can compare that, take yours compared to ours, may expose, areas of strength or gaps that you might have to really then determine where to best allocate your time and your energy. So from there, you'll probably uncover some areas in which you can distribute safety responsibilities amongst, various teams or various roles. With this, you're generating the extra bandwidth to really hone in on processes that aren't being done or could be improved upon. So you want to take those buckets that you have responsibilities in, and then really distribute and sort of crowdsource safety in a way. That way, each team member is sharing a bit of the load, and you really are making safety on that project a team sport. Lastly, really is going to be like making your sort of wish list, if you will. So listing out some processes or best practices that you want to include. And with this, I would probably start with lagging data or your lagging indicators if you have them. Maybe you have some lessons learned around incidents and injuries on jobs that went really well, and then for jobs that didn't go so well. Maybe you look at future projects. With those future projects, look at the scope of work that you have in store. The ones that might be high hazard or could be points of failure. So check those. What are some aspects of that work that your teams could improve upon, and so you avoid making those similar mistakes. And that can be, for safety, we're talking safety, but both safety and operationally, like where did we have inefficiencies on projects, and what did we learn from that? And then make a point to have teams invest extra time into planning and preparation on the front end, I think is extremely important. So once you've identified all of that and those processes that are important to you and your organization, then you can start tailoring it by adding these within the project timeline and assigning those to specific roles. That's when you want to bring in the rest of the team and make sure everyone's on the same page and can agree on some of those things.
Awesome, that's fantastic. And so one other part of it that I think can really hold the keys to some of the future is kind of looking at the future project areas of scope. And so high risk work is something that a lot of teams are focusing on at the moment. Jake, what are some of those key packages of work, and so some of those future indicators that you might look at to actually help you prioritize processes to uplift? Which parts of kind of future projects would you recommend safety folks or leaders or project leaders look at?
Yeah, I would pay special attention to the scopes that are outside of the norm, that are atypical, whether that be it construction methods or awkward access or challenging access. Things that aren't typically done day to day that everybody's really familiar with. I would definitely put some emphasis there.
Awesome. So for example, if you're an MEP contractor and there's a scope of work that you haven't, typically do, I like that access example. So really looking at the constructability analysis beforehand and partnering with the superintendents or the teams responsible for that and asking, where they see those differences. I think it's a fantastic call out. So now we're going to dive into a little bit more detail here. So Jake, back to you on sort of, I guess, really putting this into practice. So if any of you have downloaded the playbook, who's online taking a look at it, you'll notice that there's sort of 6 to 7 roles. All of those roles may or may not be applicable to the project that you're working on. What we've done here is we've just pulled out 2 of the roles. You've got a PM in there, you've got the safety manager as well. We've just pulled out 2 here just for this example. So Jake, over to you to take us through kind of looking at laying out the detail here.
Yeah. So as you're doing this, you want to make the expectations specific and make them measurable. It's not necessarily marking failure, but rather a tool to benchmark and track your improvement. So get specific, include the job title, frequency, and at which point in the project life cycle things should be done. So in addition to regular inspections, some actionable and measurable things, maybe during pre-construction, a PM schedules and hosts kickoff meetings prior to subcontractor mobilization. Were HRAs, high-risk activities, and lessons learned reviewed? Maybe you have an item for percentage of safety submittals that have been submitted, reviewed, and approved. Operationally, you may be adding things like attending a pre-task plan meeting once a week. PMs, if they're typically the ones managing schedule, we had them hold safety forecast meetings once a month. So to share with the project team the high risk upcoming activities for the following month. And this is one of those things that could be assigned to superintendents or PEs or project managers for various roles. And then, with safety, things that are outside of the norm may be, communicating trends formally and sharing that with the project team once a week or once a month. Capturing emergency action plan accuracy, right to know info, accident investigations, and how well the corrective actions are being implemented. Those things are hard to measure and aren't typically tracked very well. So you want to be sure to include things that do slip through the cracks or that you could be doing better. So it'll help serve as a constant reminder as you're going back and reviewing these things on a regular basis. With closeout, I think a really valuable process that's oftentimes overlooked is like a project recap or a lessons learned meeting. It's a great time to discuss safety and operational inefficiencies. So it makes sense that maybe a superintendent or a project manager would want to drive this. Internally, your team's buy-in is crucial. The responsibilities have to make sense to that person's role. If it's not and it's irrelevant or they don't see the value in it, they may perceive it as added work or checking a box. So one, you want to make sure that it aligns and makes sense to their typical duties. And two, include or be prepared to communicate how it's going to benefit either that individual or that project team. Whether that's by increased productivity or gained efficiencies, that's typical to their day-to-day already. Also, part of this is taking a look at your current contracts and your contract verbiage. You really want a process for accountability if and when things get off track from a project level. So have a discussion around what's currently there, what needs to be there. Again, you want to make it actionable. Make sure your team is fully aware and that it's communicated to any subcontractors that you have. Additionally, that the project team is going to be willing to withhold payment if it comes down to that. Otherwise, it's really hard to get back on track when there aren't any consequences for not making corrective actions. Externally, you've got to establish clear expectations and do it consistently across all of your projects. Expectations, even within the same company, can vary a lot depending on who's running that job, which office they're working out of, and so on. Orientations are pretty much industry standard, but orientations don't usually address all of the nuances, especially when it comes to high-risk activities or scopes that are atypical to that company. I'll give you an example. Like we had a drywall company that typically worked from lifts. Didn't start the job prepared to get engineered drawings for a dance floor for a scaffold to do this vaulted ceiling that we had. But just an example of that is grabbing some of those aspects and those one-off scopes of work, and then figuring out who's responsible for it. Is it the subcontractor or is it going to be the general on this? And just aligning in that much detail. Outside of like pre-con meetings and orientations, subcontractors never really know what to expect, from one job to the next. So it's important to get in front of this and you're really specific to what applies to that company or that scope of work, and it's communicated really well. So that whole conversation that I just described, define what that meeting or that conversation is, when it needs to happen, and who's responsible for making sure it does. So internally for us, we called them pre-flight meetings, and we would hold a team meeting. Externally, we called them kickoff meetings, but these were the things that we were reviewing. So some other things we would discuss are, the high risk activities, but we're also bringing in the safety and the operational lessons learned from past projects, and walking through in detail, in depth, those one-off scopes of work. A lot of the times you'll uncover gaps, like gaps in training or scope gaps, or particular subcontractor needs in which somebody else, they're expecting somebody else to do it. The other party is expecting them to do it, and it just gets missed. Like, the need to grade for a crane pad, everyone knows that a crane's coming and nobody is doing the grading to accept the crane, right? So the better the communication and the discovery around that, the better suited everyone's going to be at managing their safety programs, the less unexpected hazards you're going to encounter. And ultimately, you want a framework that's considered the expectation and have back in that, hey, this is the way that we're operating and this is what's being expected of everyone.
That's fantastic. I love those examples, Jake, and I think it's really important to consider it from all sorts of perspectives. So whether it's individual roles, externally, internally, as you mentioned, because the safety program has to move just from you as a contractor across onto people as a team. And I think that's the scopes of work is an interesting one. I definitely remember being on a project where the crane pad wasn't in someone's scope and we had exactly that and had to process a change order. And I do wonder how the safety plan was developed, if it was rushed, if it was there, and all prepared. We didn't have an issue with it, but it's exactly the same issue came up that you just described there. So yeah, very, very real example. So the next step that we're going to talk through is, taking this plan. So say you've developed a plan, you've got buy-in for an accountability matrix, you've realigned roles and responsibilities so that everyone knows what they're doing and has really, really good, a really good understanding of what's expected of them throughout the project, which is a fantastic position to be in. And that's definitely your first step as a part of this. I think definitely draw parallels here between the matrix and the similarities between pre-planning from a safety standpoint, where your accountability matrix is really your plan of how you're going to work safely and your plan of how you're going to distribute safety across everyone involved on the project. And so the really interesting part is now, how do you take that plan and actually move it into action? And how do you know how you're doing against that plan? Exactly what we were talking about from how do you move pre-planning into execution? How do you move your accountability matrix into execution and make sure it's real? So the next thing that we've got for you here is a consistency survey, which is a really interesting tool that Jake used in his prior life with DPR Construction and a number of other contractors. So we've created an example here, which is sort of a simplified version of it, a generic version of it. But Jake, take us through, what is a consistency survey to start with, and how does it help you actually take this plan and move it into action?
Yeah. We used to say, if you're not keeping score, it's just practice. So we kept score with a project consistency survey, which is basically a report card. And prior to HammerTech, it was a spreadsheet that had each expectation from the accountability matrix listed out, and this is why it's so important that these are actionable and measurable. And then we assigned points to each. So like if it were a yes, no, was it done or not done type question, you were given 4 points or 0 points. So each month the team would meet as a group and determine a score for each of those. So having a common method of scoring all projects, regardless of size or scope, kept it kind of light but competitive naturally. And it also served to keep teams and individuals accountable. You know, ones who score low know why they scored low, but more importantly, knew exactly what to do to fix it and improve next month's score. Each project would do this and then report it out, once a month. With HammerTech, all we did was set up a dashboard with these metrics and had them auto reporting out. And then would incentivize that month's winners to lunch or beers or something, And this process, it can evolve and grow with time, but so does the impact to your site safety culture.
And Jake, I guess the question that I have for you is, why is it important that the project teams owned doing this consistency survey as opposed to the safety team?
Yeah, because like having the conversation around responsibilities and who's doing what, I think it's important to do this also as a team is to be honest and to face the gaps or face the areas in which you're not doing so well. And when you're in a room and you're, face to face with everybody, it brings everybody together. Everyone knows what needs to be done and they have a mutual interest in scoring well. So they're going to want to help pick up the slack in areas that you were slacking on the month prior. But it's super important that you're keeping track of this because a lot of these aspects aren't really measurable or aren't being tracked well, in which I've noticed, it's like we have some good leading indicators and we've got some good lagging indicators, but how are we really measuring all of those aspects that are going on in between the two? And I think this is a good process that you can use to capture some of those things.
Yeah, that's fantastic. It's getting that consistent buy-in, right? That if everyone's involved from a plan standpoint, everyone's got to be involved from an execution standpoint. So yeah, I think as the title suggests, the goal is really consistency right the way across things. So yeah, and I think a bit of reward and recognition as you did really goes a long way to making sure that this is something that delivers value, drives really good conversations, but can also be a bit of healthy competition across project teams. I really like that. So that's from a content standpoint, that's sort of where we're going to move into the Q&A for now. So I'll just summarize very quickly what we've covered off for you all. So we covered off best practices for a robust safety program. Those processes are contained in the Construction Safety Playbook. You've then got access to the accountability matrix tool. There is a Word version of it that we will be sending out as a part of it. If you would like a version of the consistency survey, also welcome to reach out to us. And then last but not least, we've worked through how to make this program your own. And so before we move into Q&A, what I wanted to mention is that at HammerTech, we recently launched a new tool called HammerTech Go. So this is a new version of our platform. And so HammerTech Go is an out-of-the-box solution which provides pre-configured processes and templates. So it's a safety program ready to go out of the box for contractors of all sizes. One of the biggest challenges of bringing in new technology or uplifting a safety program is change management and being able to reduce the change. And so what HammerTech Go does is makes it really, really easy to implement and roll out a safety technology in just 2 weeks, which is far below the industry average. And so with that, you get 30 forms, 100+ checklists, and everything in one place. It's free for subcontractors, which is fantastic. As we've mentioned, making safety a team sport's really at the heart of what we want to do here at HammerTech and what our platform really seeks to do. So that one's now available and ready for you. So whether it's you or whether someone else in the industry that you work with that you think might fit this, HammerTech Go is a great new alternative. Hamatech itself is a highly configurable project, really built for bespoke safety programs. So we're now really able to offer a solution for people coming at safety from a different process. We found that Hamatech Go has had a really great take up from specialty contractors. And so specialty or general, there's a fantastic solution out there for you. And so with that, we'll move across into the Q&A. And so please, if you've got any questions, feel free to drop them in the chat, and we'll be happy to tackle those as we move through things. So Jake, thank you so much for all of your questions today. It's been fantastic to be able to dive into some of your prior experience here as a part of things. Even though we work together, it's not very often I get to sort of really dive into the experience that you've got as a part of things. One question that I did have for you, and I'm going to throw you one here that's definitely not pre-planned, but is really around kind of the self-perform side of things, and sort of how does this accountability matrix work from a self-perform side of things? Do you consider self-perform internal? Do you consider them external? And how did you go about, I guess, balancing kind of their different needs, which is, you know, much higher risk because they're actually out in the field doing the works? Anything that you can think of that would help for anyone who's got a self-perform program as a part of their contracting service?
Yeah. And the process itself is going to look really similar. It's just going to be the individual responsibilities may look a little bit differently, just because the role of, say, the safety manager for a general contractor, safety manager for, a large subcontractor on a job are pretty close. It's just those measurables are going to be the variable there. But I also think, from a GC perspective, compliance is really big when it comes to yourself, the work that you're self-performing. You're much closer to the work, and I think it provides even more value to the contractors that, their direct employees are the ones doing the work, being exposed to these hazards. So staying on top of it with a process like this and keeping, a finger on the pulse is extremely important.
Yeah, fantastic. Lovely. Well, I haven't seen any questions come through the Q&A. If you do have anything, you know where to find us. Feel free to connect with me and Jake, both on LinkedIn. We'd love to keep in touch and keep the conversations going. Jamila is going to be sending out a post-event email, and we'll, because you've now joined one of our webinars, you'll be the first to know about upcoming events that we've got coming up. We're going to be presenting a couple of sessions in the not too distant future with some customers of ours, really looking at new use cases for safety technology and really driving sort of continuous improvement across the spectrum. So we're really looking forward to bringing those online in future events over the coming months. So Jamila, thank you so much for organizing today. I really appreciate it. Jake, thank you so much for your expertise. And thank you so much to everyone who's joined us today. Look forward to being in touch and keeping these events rolling. And yeah, stay safe out there, and we'll see you all very soon. Thank you.